Imagine a place where time seems to have stopped, where dreams fade with the setting sun, and where an ancient secret watches over a forgotten town. In this remote corner of the world, on the gray coast of a desolate sea, a flickering light pierces the darkness each night. But this light isn't just there to guide ships, it's the only thing standing between us and an unspeakable terror waiting to be unleashed. Join me as we dive into this tale, where an ordinary man faces an extraordinary responsibility, and failure is not an option. Because in the pitch-black night, when the light fades, something far darker waits for its moment. If this story has captivated you as much as it has terrified me, don't forget to support us by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment. Your support is essential for us to continue bringing you thrilling tales like this one. Join our community and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upcoming video. Thank you for being part of this terrifying journey with us. I live in a small town that seems to have been forgotten by the rest of the world. It sits on the gray, quiet coast of a desolate sea. Travelers rarely visit, and anyone born here with even a sliver of ambition leaves as soon as they can. Our town is not a place where dreams flourish. It's a quiet, lonely place sustained by a meager fishing industry and little else. Yet, make no mistake, it's not a particularly unhappy place. Those of us who choose to stay have built modest lives for ourselves. Our community is strong, close-knit even, but I harbor no illusions about our town. It's nothing more than what it is, a quiet, unassuming fishing port. There was only one resident of our town who might have been known beyond our borders, the late Olaf Bolstad. He was the patriarch of one of the oldest and most powerful families here. His was the most successful of the small fishing companies that dominate our little town. Until his death 40 years ago, Olaf lived in the Bolstad House, a grand mansion just outside of town. The Bolstad House was a marvel, a large, beautiful structure that seemed more like a castle or cathedral than a mere residence. It sat atop a hill overlooking the town, with massive towers reaching toward the sky. At the highest point of the house, a single green light shone, visible for miles. My mother once told me that the light was there to prevent low-flying aircraft from accidentally clipping the tower, though I'd never seen an aircraft anywhere near our area. Olaf was a generous and respectable man who had spent his youth working on the boats before taking over the family business. He cared deeply for our community and did what he could to ensure that we prospered. However, his son, whose name I never learned, seemed less invested in upholding family traditions. He left our town long ago, choosing to run the company from somewhere far away, leaving the Bolstad house empty and neglected after Olaf's death. I used to be a fisherman, but the sea is a violent and treacherous mistress. One wrong decision can end your life or the lives of others. My captain made such a decision during a storm that caught us by surprise. The stubborn fool tried to sail through it, and as a result, our boat capsized. Many of us were rescued by a nearby trawler, but too many others were lost to the sea. Lifelong friends swallowed by the waves, all because of one man's arrogance. My leg was broken in the accident, and it never healed properly. I could have gone back to fishing, but I lost my taste for it. I was still a young man and had no intention of dying young. I decided to seek safer employment, and that's how I ended up at the Bolstad House. Ever since Olaf Bolstad's death, the house had been maintained by Isaac Jensen, a man well known in town. Isaac was somewhere on the young side of 70, with a white beard and a bald head always covered by a cap. I often saw him alone in the local pub, having a drink. When I heard he was looking for help at the Bolstad House, I thought it might be the change I needed. One night, I approached him in the pub and asked if I could sit with him. He nodded and gestured to the seat across from him. "I hear you're looking for help at the Bolstad House, old-timer," I said. Isaac scoffed and cracked a weary smile. "A little more than just help," he replied. "If you're here to offer yourself, know that this is a commitment, not just a job." "I've got nothing but time and a willingness to work," I replied. Isaac stared at me for a moment before finally nodding. "All right then, I've seen you around with the other fishermen. What's your name, boy? Nikolai. Nikolai Wayne. Well then, Nikolai, the work to keep the house up takes its toll after a while, and my old joints can't do it for much longer. It's hardly a two-man job, so don't count on having me around for too long. The faster you learn, the faster I can retire. You're after a replacement? Then I asked. The old man nodded. We only have so many years on this earth, dear boy. I've worked my fair share. I've given up my body, my youth, and much of my life in exchange for money. Now I want to enjoy the time I have left. Perhaps you won't spend the remainder of your days working at the Bolstad House, but know that you will spend years there. Are you prepared for that? The severity in his tone struck me as odd, but I nodded. I'm prepared, I replied. Well then, let me buy you a drink, boy. I'll assume you're available to start in the morning. 5 a.m. Sharp. 5 a.m. Sharp, I repeated. Old Isaac smiled, baring his yellow teeth at me. Attaboy. True to my word, I was at the Bolstad House before 5 a.m. The next morning, I felt a mix of intimidation and excitement that comes with a new job. Old Isaac was waiting for me by the time I drove up the hill. He lived in a small cottage on the edge of the property and invited me inside for coffee while he handled the paperwork for my employment. The contracts were straightforward, similar to those I'd seen before while working on fishing boats. We finished the paperwork quickly, and the real work began. Isaac took me on a tour of the house and its grounds, starting with the gardens. Despite no one living in the house for decades, the gardens were surprisingly well maintained, a testament to the old man's dedication. Gardening had never interested me much, but I supposed I could learn to love it, given time. The little things in life can keep you happy, Isaac said as we walked through the back garden. A quiet job like this isn't exactly lively. The gardens aren't much, but they keep me busy, lift my spirits. Might be they'll do the same for you. As he spoke, I noticed him staring at a small shape near the rear of the garden. It looked like a cross planted in the earth. What's that? I asked. Isaac was silent for a moment before he answered. Something of a memorial. A bad storm hit town a few years back, probably before your time. Quite a few people died. Olaf requested it be there in their memory. When I'm gone, you can do what you want with the gardens. While I hope you'll keep caring for them as I have. I don't expect it. But that marker, tend to it well. The dead deserve their respect. I nodded silently, making a mental note to ensure the marker was always taken care of. Isaac finally turned away and led me inside the house. The interior of the Bolstad house was meticulously maintained. It felt more like a museum or a mock-up of a home rather than a place where people had lived. Everything was spotless, with fresh linens on the beds and marble floors that gleamed from recent mopping. Yet it was clear that no one had lived there for decades. Young mister, Bolstad may never come back here, but for what he pays, he deserves to return to a clean house, Isaac said. So long as you keep the place tidy, it will be easy enough to maintain. I've spent more of my days out in the garden or tending to the lawn than in here. I'll pass through once a week or so, never more than that. It's a shame such a lovely house is sitting unused, I said. Did Mr. Bolstad ever mention selling it? Sell it, Isaac repeated with a scoff. I doubt the boy would. This house belongs to the Bolstad family. It is their responsibility. They won't sell it, I can promise you that much. I'll take you up to the tower next. It's the most important room in the house. Follow me. Isaac led me up a spiral staircase to a small round room with green-tinted glass walls. There was barely enough space for both of us, and the air smelled strongly of oil and smoke. This would be the tower, Isaac said, his voice tinged with reverence. Olaf Bolstad first brought me up here when I was about your age, give or take. He was very particular about this little light. You need to make sure it's got plenty of oil, and every night before you head into town. You need to make sure it's lit and going strong. Never let the light go out at night, boy. During the day, it should be fine, you can put it out in the mornings. But at night, it must remain lit at all times. Why, I asked. Is this some sort of lighthouse? There's one by the port that's far brighter. Well, it's supposedly to distinguish the house in the night sky. It's a little quirk of the Bolstads one his son upholds. Ask them, and they'd say that this here is perhaps the most important job, considering how prominently it's mentioned in your contract. It's best to ensure it gets lit before the sun goes down. Check the oil before dusk to make sure if it needs to be refilled, you've got plenty of time to get it done. When the sky starts to turn, the light needs to go up. Do you understand? I suppose so, I said. Isaac didn't look satisfied. You don't see the point in it, do you, boy? No, not really. Just know that it's your job to keep the light on and, in the morning, to put it out. You could sleep all day, let the house get dirty, and let the garden die, and I doubt Bolstad would give a damn. But the light must stay on at night. Is that much clearer to you? I nodded, and Isaac patted me on the shoulder. Good man. Now let's get downstairs. I've got a few repairs around the house I could use your help with. He squeezed past me to begin his descent, and we soon left the tower behind. My first day was productive enough. True to his word, I helped Isaac repair some old brickwork on the north side of the house. After that, the workload was light. We spent more than our fair share of the afternoon drinking beer in the backyard. Considering the pay for the job, this felt like a steal. I was making as much as I'd made as a fisherman. In the evening, we went back inside to light the tower. I followed Isaac up the stairway and watched as he lit the lantern. It was a simple act, a brief stop in the tower before we headed back down for the night. I was already thinking that I might just enjoy my new employment. If the light was the most important thing, and everything else was minor grunt work and getting drunk, I could more than handle it. The next day was much the same. Isaac had already put the light out when I arrived, and we spent most of the morning weeding the garden before taking an extended lunch in the shade. I made a point not to get carried away with the drinks. Old Isaac could put away beer like it was water, but I still had my limits. Our extended lunch swallowed up most of the day, save for a few minor chores. By the time dusk began to fall, I was ready to go home with a comfortable buzz and the feeling that this new job was too good to be true. But as I was about to leave, Isaac spoke up. "You're forgetting something, aren't you?" he asked. I paused, trying to recall what he meant. "The light," the old man said. "Never forget about the light, boy. If there's one thing you can't forget, it's that. Come on, let's go together." He gestured for me to follow as he polished off the last of his beer and headed for the stairs. Just like before, turning on the light was a brief stop before we left for the day, a minor, trivial task insisted upon by an eccentric old family, but one I could certainly live with. The weeks following my hiring were relatively quiet, all things considered. Despite a few more major projects under Isaac's guidance, such as redoing part of the deck and patching up the roof, my days were mostly lazy. Isaac had a tendency to space out the larger tasks, giving us a few days of trivial jobs after each major project. I suspected he enjoyed lazing about even more than I did, and I wasn't about to complain about free beer and quiet afternoons in the garden, especially not for the money we were being paid. My first paycheck was nothing short of glorious. I was half convinced that I was dreaming, and the knowledge that more were coming felt too good to be true. But they did come, regularly, as promised. All in all, I spent 2 months working alongside Isaac, and they were undoubtedly some of the easiest months I'd ever worked. Yes, we showed up every day, but the workload was never heavy. As long as we lit the tower at dusk, everything went smoothly. Isaac tended to be the one to light the tower. In the 2 months we worked together, I only did it once. I still didn't understand the significance behind that strange ritual, but its importance was ingrained in my mind. Every night before we left, I followed Isaac up to the tower to light the lantern. Sometimes he would go earlier to check the oil, but that was a task he typically did alone. When our time together finally came to an end after 2 months, Isaac informed me that he was going to move on. It was late on what would be our last day together. We had spent the day repainting part of the newly redone back porch, and now we sat on lawn chairs, drinking beer and looking out at the garden. "You'll be on your own tomorrow," Isaac said, the words coming seemingly out of nowhere. I looked up at him, only half surprised. I'd known from the start that our days together were numbered. Finally hitting the road, old-timer, I asked. "All the bigger projects are done: the roof, the porch, the things I couldn't do myself. You know the job. You don't need me here, and you can afford your own damn beer," he said with a laugh, and I caught the old man smiling back at me. "My daughter is in town to visit. When she leaves, I'll be going with her. I've spent my life in this little place. I'd like to use the years I have left to see some more of the world before it's too late," Isaac continued. I nodded in understanding as he took another sip of beer, then reached into the pocket of his dirty overalls and pulled out a slip of paper. "Here. I doubt you'll run into any trouble, but if you need me, you can reach me. I must warn you, though after a week, I won't be in town. You'll need to hire your own help." I took the paper, feeling a twinge of sadness. Shame. "I doubt they'll be half as charming, old-timer," I said, raising my beer in a toast. He returned the gesture. "If I don't see you again, it's been a pleasure, Nikolai." Likewise. Our bottles clinked together as we let our final day end. At the close of it, Isaac and I went up to the tower to turn on the light, just as we had done every night before. And then we parted ways. The first few days alone were uneventful and, admittedly, far too quiet. I had music to keep me company, but it wasn't quite the same as having someone to talk to. Old Isaac had been kind enough to leave me a note in the shed, reminding me about the light, and I kept it in my pocket to ensure I wouldn't forget. Each evening I made sure to go upstairs to the tower and light the lantern before heading home for the night. For the first 4 nights, everything went smoothly. But on the 5th night, I ran into some trouble. As the sun began to set, I made my way up to the tower as usual. I went through the motions of lighting the lantern, only to find that it wouldn't stay lit. The flames sputtered out quickly, far weaker than it should have been. It didn't take long to figure out why the oil reserve was almost completely dry. It must have nearly burned itself out the night before, leaving barely enough to start the flame tonight. I cursed myself quietly for forgetting to check the oil, but it was a mistake I was determined not to make again. At least I knew where Isaac had kept the oil, and it was just a quick trip down to the shed to get it. I filled a small canister with oil and hurried back to the house. The sky was growing darker by the minute, and I knew I was running late. I returned to the tower as quickly as I could, but I couldn't help but notice how still the evening had become. The usual sounds of the town, distant voices, the call of seabirds had faded away, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Once inside the small room at the top of the tower, I refueled the lantern. Through the green-tinted glass, I could see the last rays of the sun dipping below the horizon. The stars began to emerge in the twilight sky, but something about them seemed wrong. They were too bright, too sharp for this time of night. I caught myself staring at them, pausing for a moment as I thought I saw them move. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped over to the windows, pushing one of them open to get an unobstructed view of the sky. I hadn't noticed any signs of a storm earlier, but now a dark, churning cloud hovered ominously over the town. Its texture was unlike any cloud I'd ever seen, almost like turbulent water, but black as ink. Strangely, the stars shone through the cloud, though it was thick and foreboding. The sight unsettled me deeply. As I stood there, a dull ringing began in my ears, growing louder with each passing second. I stared up at the cloud, watching in horror as it seemed to descend, drawing closer and closer to the town. The stars within it pulsed and flickered erratically, and the ringing in my ears became almost unbearable. My mind raced with panic, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Was this a storm? Something else? Some terrible force beyond my understanding? The realization struck me like a physical blow. This was no ordinary cloud, no simple storm. Whatever it was alive, a vast and incomprehensible entity, its dark mass rippling and shifting as it descended upon the town. I could feel the pressure building in my skull, the oppressive weight of its presence crushing down on me. Blood began to trickle from my nose, the metallic taste filling my mouth as I struggled to stay on my feet. In my panic, I stumbled back, bumping against the lantern. I stared at it, my mind reeling. The lantern, the unlit lantern. Somehow, in my terror, I thought that lighting it might help. Desperation drove me to action, and I reached for the lighter, fumbling with shaking hands to ignite the wick. The lantern flared to life, casting a bright green light across the room. As soon as the light filled the tower, the ground beneath me trembled violently, as if the very earth was about to split open. I lost my footing and fell to the floor, gasping for breath as the pressure in my head reached a crescendo. But just as quickly as the pain had come, it began to fade. The ringing in my ears softened, the blood stopped flowing, and the terrible pressure in my skull lessened. I forced myself to look back up through the window, where the entity in the sky had begun to retreat. Its pulsating stars dimmed and the cloud rose higher into the atmosphere, growing fainter with each passing moment. The light had driven it back. How, I couldn't say, but the realization filled me with a sense of grim satisfaction. I had done something right. As I picked myself up on unsteady legs, I ran to the window, searching the sky for any sign of the monstrous entity. But it was gone, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. The stars returned to their normal, distant shimmer, and the sky cleared once more. Almost as soon as it had come, the thing in the clouds had left no trace of itself behind. Almost no trace. My little town doesn't have a newspaper or a news channel, but word travels fast here. It didn't take long before I heard about the 6 people who had died suddenly during the storm that night. All of them were older and already sick, but they had collapsed dead, either in the streets or in their homes, blood pouring from their eyes, noses, and mouths. The town doctor wouldn't find an explanation for their deaths. I was sure of that. If anyone in town knew what had truly happened, they didn't say. No mention was made of the light in the Bolstad House. I was late to work the following morning, my head still aching slightly, my vision slightly blurred, but I knew I needed to put the light out. Whatever I had seen, it didn't seem to come out during the day. I wasn't sure if I was surprised to find old Isaac waiting for me at the Bolstad House when I arrived. He sat patiently on the front porch, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. "Come and sit," Isaac said, his voice steady but firm. "You and I need to talk." Slowly, I climbed the steps and sat down beside him, feeling like a child about to be scolded. I hated myself for feeling that way. "You saw it, I presume," Isaac said. I hesitated before nodding. "The oil, I forgot to check it. I went down to get more and—" "It's not a mistake you'll make again," Isaac interrupted, sighing deeply. His expression softened, and he seemed to age before my eyes. "Your mistake was less costly than my own." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Olaf Bolstad told me what would come if the light wasn't kept on. In my youth, I dismissed his tale as the ramblings of an insane old man. One night, I neglected the light entirely. That thing came down from the sky. And 50 people lost their lives before Olaf corrected my mistake. He nearly killed himself in the process. I had hoped to avoid making the same mistake with you by providing a more mundane reason to keep the tower lit at night. Perhaps that was a mistake in and of itself." Isaac's words left me speechless. I struggled to process what he was telling me, to understand the gravity of the situation. What was that thing, Isaac? What did it want? "I can't say," Isaac replied, his voice low. To this day, I don't know exactly what it is. I've only ever seen it once, and I doubt even Olaf knew, or his grandfather who figured out how to ward it off with the light. I don't think it's something we're meant to know. I just think it's something we need to fear. I sat in stunned silence, the weight of Isaac's revelation pressing down on me. The light's importance was far greater than I could have ever imagined. "You know what your job is now?" correct Isaac asked, breaking the silence. I nodded slowly, understanding the burden that had been placed on my shoulders. "Good. I have the stone to craft a new memorial out in the back garden. You can put it beside mine. Think of it as a reminder of what can happen, although I don't think you'll need it. You know the cost of negligence now, boy. I trust you won't make the same mistake again." I nodded once more, my mind still reeling from everything I had learned. Isaac stood up, his movements slow and deliberate as he rubbed his temples. Before he left, he turned to look at me one last time. "Stay safe, boy. This world is filled with terrible things. I pray you don't encounter more of them." And with that, he walked away, leaving me alone on the porch. I haven't seen him since. 2 years have passed since that night, and I still work at the Bolstad House. In that time, I've never seen the creature in the clouds again, nor have I forgotten the importance of the light. Every evening, as the sun begins to set, I climb the spiral staircase to the tower and light the lantern, ensuring that its green glow pierces the night. It's a ritual I perform with the utmost care, fully aware of the consequences of failure. The work at the Bolstad House has remained relatively simple, but the knowledge of what I am protecting the town from has forever changed the way I approach it. The light is not just a job, it's a duty, a sacred responsibility. The ease with which I perform my tasks before that night is now replaced by a sense of vigilance. Every day, I inspect the oil, checking and double-checking to ensure that it's sufficient. The gardens, once a minor distraction, now serve as a place of quiet reflection, where I often find myself pondering the mysteries of the world beyond our understanding. The town, too, seems unchanged on the surface, but I can't help but feel a deeper connection to it now. The people go about their lives, blissfully unaware of the unseen danger that looms above them. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has seen what I saw that night, if there are others in this world who bear the same burden. But I dare not ask. Some things are better left unspoken, and I fear that speaking of it might somehow draw that terrible entity back. The memorial Isaac mentioned now stands in the back garden, a simple stone marker beside the old one. I carved it myself, using the stone he left behind. It bears no names, no inscriptions, just a silent reminder of the lives lost and the responsibility I carry. Every time I walk past it, I feel a chill run down my spine, a reminder that the light must never go out. Isaac's words still echo in my mind, "Stay safe, boy. This world is filled with terrible things. I used to think that was just the musings of an old man who had seen too much, but now I know better. The world is indeed filled with terrible things, things that defy understanding, things that lurk in the shadows and wait for the moment when we let our guard down." One evening, as I sat in the garden, enjoying the cool breeze that drifted in from the sea, I noticed something strange. The sky, usually clear and blue at this time of year, seemed to have a faint, dark tint to it. It was barely noticeable, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I stared up at the sky, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it back? Had I missed something? Was the light fading? I bolted from the garden, my heart pounding in my chest, and sprinted to the tower. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I reached the top, I nearly collapsed in relief. The lantern was still burning brightly, its green light steady and strong. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm my racing heart. But the unease wouldn't leave me. I looked out through the green-tinted glass, scanning the horizon for any sign of the entity I had seen before. The sky was clear, the stars beginning to twinkle in the fading light of dusk. There was no sign of the dark cloud, no unnatural stars pulsing in the sky. But the feeling of being watched, of something malevolent lurking just out of sight, remained. I checked the oil, even though I had just done so an hour before. It was full, as expected, but I topped it off anyway, just to be sure. Then, I sat down in the small room, watching the lantern as if my life depended on it. Maybe it did. The minutes dragged by, and as the last light of day disappeared, the unease in my gut grew stronger. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was coming. The hours passed in agonizing silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the town winding down for the night. I stayed in the tower, unable to bring myself to leave. The green light of the lantern filled the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I watched those shadows, half expecting them to shift and move of their own accord. The darkness outside seemed to press in on the windows, as if trying to smother the light. It wasn't until the first rays of dawn began to break that I finally allowed myself to relax. The sky lightened, the stars faded, and the oppressive feeling began to lift. I waited until the sun was fully up before extinguishing the lantern, just as Isaac had taught me. Only then did I descend the stairs and leave the tower, my limbs heavy with exhaustion. That day I worked in the garden as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided disaster. Had I imagined it? Was the entity still out there, waiting for another opportunity to strike? I didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. As the days passed, the feeling of dread began to fade, though it never truly left. I resumed my routine, lighting the lantern each evening and putting it out each morning. But I found myself looking up at the sky more often, scanning for any sign of the dark cloud. I avoided talking to the townsfolk about it, unsure of how to explain what I had seen. How could I tell them that their safety depended on a single light in a forgotten house on a hill? One night, several weeks after that unsettling evening, I awoke with a start. My heart was pounding, and I had the distinct feeling that something was terribly wrong. The room was pitch black, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. I stumbled out of bed, my instincts screaming at me to get to the tower. I raced through the darkened house, nearly tripping over the furniture in my haste. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I reached the stairs and began to climb. Each step felt like an eternity, the fear in my chest growing with every passing second. When I finally reached the top, my worst fears were confirmed. The lantern was out. A cold sweat broke out on my skin as I fumbled for the lighter. My hands were trembling so violently that I could barely get it to spark. When it finally did, the flame flickered weakly before catching on the wick. The lantern flared to life, but I knew it was too late. I turned toward the window, dreading what I might see. The sky outside was filled with dark, swirling clouds, and the stars within them pulsed with a sickening, unnatural light. The ringing in my ears returned, louder and more intense than ever before. I pressed my hands to the sides of my head, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The pressure in my skull was unbearable, and I could feel blood trickling from my nose once again. The cloud was descending rapidly, moving toward the town with terrifying speed. I knew that if it reached the ground, there would be no saving the people below. The lantern's light seemed to flicker and wane, struggling against the darkness that surrounded it. Desperation gripped me as I realized that I might not be able to stop it this time. In a moment of clarity, I remembered something Isaac had told me during one of our early days together: the light is the key. But sometimes it needs a little help. I didn't understand what he had meant at the time, but now, in the face of unimaginable horror, the meaning became clear. I grabbed the canister of oil and poured the entire contents into the lantern's reservoir. The flame roared to life, burning brighter than ever before. The green light filled the room, banishing the shadows and illuminating the sky outside. The effect was immediate. The dark cloud hesitated, its descent slowing, as if confused by the sudden burst of light. But it wasn't enough. The cloud continued to press down, the stars within it pulsing with malevolent intent. I needed more. I needed something stronger. I looked around the room, my mind racing. The only thing I had was the lighter, and in my desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I tossed the lighter into the lantern's flame. The explosion was immediate and violent. The force of it knocked me off my feet and sent me crashing into the wall. The room filled with blinding green light, and the tower shook as if it might collapse. The pain in my head was excruciating, and for a moment, I thought I was going to die. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, the light began to fade. The ringing in my ears subsided, and the pressure in my skull lessened. I forced myself to look up, expecting to see the dark cloud looming over the town. But it was gone. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling peacefully above. The dark cloud had vanished, taking with it the malevolent presence that had threatened to destroy everything. The lantern, however, was destroyed. Its glass was shattered, the metal frame twisted and blackened from the explosion. I lay on the floor of the tower, too weak to move, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had done it. Somehow I had driven the entity away. But at what cost? The lantern was gone, and with it, the only means of protection we had against the creature in the sky. It took me hours to gather the strength to leave the tower. When I finally made it down the stairs and out into the garden, the first light of dawn was beginning to break. I stood there for a long time, staring up at the sky, wondering if the entity would return. I didn't know if I had truly defeated it, or if I had just bought us a little more time. In the weeks that followed, I found myself grappling with the enormity of what had happened. The people in town went about their lives, blissfully unaware of the danger they had been in. But I knew the truth. I knew that the light was the only thing keeping them safe, and without it, we were vulnerable. I couldn't stay in the Bolstad house after that. The thought of another night in the tower filled me with dread. I left the town, just as so many others had done before me, and I never looked back. But even now, as I sit far away from that lonely place, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. That somewhere, out there in the dark, the entity is waiting, watching, biding its time until the light is gone for good. And when that day comes, I fear there will be no one left to stop it. Here's the English version of the concluding paragraph. Nikolai's story and the Bolstad house remind us that sometimes the simplest tasks carry the greatest responsibilities. The flickering light in the tower was more than just a symbol of duty. It was a bulwark against forces beyond our understanding. This tale invites us to reflect on the weight of traditions and how they can sometimes protect us from more than we realize. If this story intrigued you or gave you chills, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more captivating adventures. And feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion truly matters to us and helps us continue bringing you quality content. Thank you for being part of this mystery-loving community.